Private practice is a very jealous mistress, and you need to then make sure that before you commit to a lifetime relationship with this very jealous mistress, that you do know what you're getting yourself into. Singapore, as many of you may know, is a very small country in Southeast Asia. We're about 70 kilometers across, and we're something like 3.5 million Singaporeans, 5.5 if you include the itinerant working population. So Singapore really, as a financial hub, serves the greater Southeast Asian market. And if you ask any lawyer in Singapore who is an M&A lawyer or a transactions lawyer, chances are he'll have built his practice doing cross-border transactions. Indonesia, in contrast, is a very different animal to Singapore. It's the largest market in Southeast Asia. From east to west, it's the distance between London and Baghdad. It's the largest archipelagic nation in the world, 17,000 islands. It's the fourth most populous country in the world at 265 million Indonesians, and it's also the largest Muslim population in the world. For this reason, Singapore is Southeast Asia hub. But in my previous firm, we saw that the opportunities for growth in our corporate M&A practice was in Indonesia. So when the opportunity came 5 years ago for me to go to Indonesia to start and to develop the Indonesian practice, that was an opportunity I thought I couldn't give up. So I wrote a 2-year business plan, moved to Jakarta, and 5 years later, I'm still here. So Singapore, like Hong Kong, is a common law jurisdiction. We inherited our legal framework from the British, and we got a very similar political and legal structure to the British. Singapore, also like Hong Kong, prides itself on having a set of easy to understand regulations that are very business friendly and are very strong institutions like the courts and arbitration centers. And Singapore, like Hong Kong, is also a place where business dealings are very transparent. So lawyers in this part of the world like to describe Singapore as a low-friction environment to doing business. It's easy to set up companies, it's easy to enforce contracts, it's easy to hire people, and so on. Indonesia, again, is an almost polar opposite of Singapore in every respect. It is a very messy country. It inherits its legal framework from the Dutch and is therefore a civil law jurisdiction. As part of its history of independence, it went through a process where much of the political and lawmaking power was divested from the central government to regional governments, and therefore the laws are very interesting in the sense that they don't always make sense, they're not always easily accessible, they're applied in ways that may sometimes be inconsistent by institutions that are perhaps not as transparent as Hong Kongers and Singaporeans might be used to. Therefore, in our parlance, we refer to Indonesia as a high-friction environment for doing business. It's not easy to set up companies, it's not easy to enforce contracts, and it has some of the most onerous labor and tax regulations in the world. But you'll find that in Singapore, as in Indonesia, different challenges present different opportunities, and a high-friction environment like Indonesia presents an extraordinary opportunity for a lawyer with a sense of adventure and an appetite for conquering a new market. I've always been very fond of teaching. Even before I moved to Indonesia, I taught regularly at the Singapore Institute of Legal Education. I think teaching allows me to interact with lawyers much younger than myself. It allows me a very privileged position of perhaps being closer to the next generation of lawyers and understanding what it is that's important for them. This informs my own practice. It allows me to make decisions better, I think, in practices like hiring or in interacting with younger lawyers, and I find it an immensely fulfilling exercise. This is an interesting question because most of what you learn in school relates to the theory of law. You'll learn about legal principle, you'll learn about case law, you'll learn about different philosophies of law. Much of what you learn in legal practice relates to the business of law. And what I tell people all the time is, I have an immense attraction for the practice of law. So I like analyzing legal issues, I like drafting contracts, I like negotiating deals. But what what only became apparent to me as I became more advanced in my legal practice is that legal practice is a business like any other. And for those of you who are considering a long-term career in legal practice, I think this is something that you should learn about earlier rather than later. Legal practice requires you to be very committed, both in terms of the hours that you put in, as well as the effort in maintaining a level of competence. It requires you to develop your business by meeting clients and converting clients. It requires you to be very disciplined in your finances by making sure that your bills are issued and paid promptly. So there are all of these things that relate to the business aspects of law, of legal practice, which are perhaps not taught in school, or certainly not when I was in university. So a career in the law, as you know, could manifest itself in many different forms, of which private practice is one. So before considering a career in private practice, one really needs to make sure that one is committed not only to the practice of the law, but also the practice of the business. My colleague, I think, who's a fellow foreign counsel in the Indonesian office, puts it best. He says, private practice is a very jealous mistress, and you need to then make sure that before you commit to a lifetime relationship with this very jealous mistress, that you do know what you're getting yourself into. Yes, there is. Indonesia is a land of incredible opportunity for foreign lawyers. By my estimation, Indonesia is a very underserved and undersupplied legal market. I'll give you an example of what I mean. I started by saying that Singapore has a population of 3.5 million people and we're about 700 square kilometers. Indonesia, on the other hand, is 265 million people and spans the distance from London to Baghdad. By comparison, there are 130 registered foreign law firms in Singapore of varying sizes, from the Magic Circles and the New York White Shoe law firms down to, four-fee earner boutique practices. Indonesia, in comparison, in spite of being such a big market, many times the size of Singapore, has only 55 registered foreign lawyers in Indonesia, of whom I'm one. Wow. So the number changes from year to year, but it's not 60, it's between 50 and it might be in the mid-50s. So that gives you an idea. And each Indonesian firm is only allowed to hire no more than 6 foreign lawyers. So if you kind of looked at the firms with foreign lawyers in their employment, you end up with about a dozen Indonesian law firms that actively pursue and do those very complicated cross-border transactions. So that gives you an idea of how underserved the market is. It's a very lucrative market, and certainly my experience is that being a high-risk environment, clients are much more prepared to pay a premium on legal fees than they would be, for example, in Singapore. This, therefore, presents a tremendous opportunity for the enterprising lawyer who might think of developing a new area of geographical focus. And are there any popular areas now in Indonesia? Yes, there are. And 2020 has been such an interesting year for all of us. I think it's fair to say that it's not turned out the way any of us had imagined it would at the beginning of the year. But in spite of the general downturn in the world economies, there are a few bright spots yet in Indonesia. These would be in things like technology, for example, in particular fintech. These would be in areas like venture capital investment. These would be in areas like infrastructure financing, healthcare and education. Basically all of the areas where there are supply gaps for a large and growing country. So Withers is a firm that was founded in the UK about 120 years ago. We're headquartered in London and second largest office is in Singapore. We also have offices in Hong Kong. Withers is a firm that made its name on its private client and tax work, and we advise many of the most successful people and their families and businesses. In Asia, in particular in Southeast Asia, we're at a very interesting time in our history where we're seeing an intersection between our private wealth and tax work as well as our transactional and technology work, simply because many of our clients who are family offices and high net worths and ultra high net worths are increasingly developing an interest in and investing in technology or building technology businesses. And by that same token, many of our technology clients who have built successful technology businesses or have successfully invested in technology businesses are becoming high net worths and ultra high net worths. So it's a very interesting time indeed for a firm such as Withers, in particular in Asia.